A new edition of Warhammer The Horus Heresy has been announced at the drop site preview. If you missed the show, here's a quick wrap-up of everything you need to know.
There is a new edition coming. That means new rules, new miniatures, and more. Existing players will see...
Hello nerds. I'm late to the party, so we've got a lot to catch up on, all in the run-up to 3rd edition coming out. So let's start with these new articles. We'll be covering them in release order, starting with advanced characteristics, then tactical statuses, and finally, the new weapon stats. Just a quick note before we start, since we know we're going to be going into a new edition, I'd advise you guys to not go out and buy anything 30k related, unless you want it just to look cool, or you're willing to eat the cost of that model, as we don't know whether or not that unit or model that you buy is going to be really bad or not. I'd say wait and see the stats before you buy. Save yourself some money, and save yourselves the buyer's remorse. My name is Mechanid, let's get started. First up, advanced characteristics. This is one of the many changes coming from Heresy in the jump from 2nd edition to 3rd edition. In essence, it is the breaking of the leadership stat into 4 separate statistics. Leadership, cool, willpower, and intelligence, written as LD, CL, WP, and IN. These are used in characteristic checks, just like leadership checks were. You roll 2d6 and aim to be equal to or under the stated characteristic, just like a leadership check. Now, as the article states, each of these 4 will be offering something different. Leadership for orders, dealing with panic or rallying, cool for how the troops handle being under fire, willpower for psychic tests, and intelligence is for interacting with technology, such as repairing vehicles or using an auger, as the article states. Now, we see some examples of a regular Marine, and see that the Sergeant for a tactical squad is the same as a regular Legionary, except he has an extra point of leadership. Also, this shows how Sergeants have lost their extra attack. We also learn that there is a new Sergeant rule that allows for leaders to test on behalf of their squads, which is nice, I guess, for clarifying that. We see that Centurions are much better off in all regards, and that different consoles, such as the Master of Signals, have an intelligence stat of 10, making him much better at using tech. This is one area where the system could work, with different characters having much more defined skills and talents to further enhance their roles, which is cool. One thing here to note is that Horus Ascended has 14 leadership, and even with the crippling modifiers, he will never run. This implies to me that Primarchs can have their characteristics modified, unlike in 2.0, where they can't. This implies to me that this will be a nerf to Primarchs. However, I doubt that very much to happen, as I think it would do something to hurt the reputation and the demigod status of Primarchs. Also, we learn that the Charonite Ogrins are the lowest intelligence unit in the game, so they are less intelligent than a literal lobotomite, which is funny. On a side note, while it is nice to see a lot of other stats written out, until we see the wider context for these stats, we have little to go on. I'm assuming that we get close to the top of the curve with Vulcan here, and towards the bottom with one of the tech thralls. However, until we see the full context, it's difficult to put these stats in context. You can safely assume that a tactical space marine is going to be somewhere around the middle, but again, there can still be a lot of difference here, what with introducing Solar Auxilia, Militia, Mechanicum units like robots and automata, and then all the way up into some of the other larger units like Primarchs. My biggest issue with these advanced characteristics is how it appears to me to be a needless addition in the vein of calling back to Rogue Trader, a game released well before I was even born. And while GW states that this is not a nostalgia-driven choice, I fail to see any other reason for bringing this system back from the dead. If this wasn't about nostalgia, then GW wouldn't mention that this is from an older edition of the game. They would talk about how the system as a new addition. They would talk about how much the system works as a new edition and not harp on about how it's making a return. 3rd edition is very much the nostalgia edition with the return of SAF-9 Terminators, so I don't understand why GW is denying this. Nostalgia sells like hotcakes, and GW is not above playing their greatest hits to draw a crowd. Quite frankly, I don't see what these stats bring to the game that we didn't already have. I understand the intention to better represent the individual characteristics of the different units. The article clearly points out how Space Marines are generally good under most circumstances, but a lobotomized tech thrall is great at walking forwards and catching bullets. But if that's the case, surely we just use special rules like stubborn or fearless, or another rule to represent these characteristics, rather than breaking down one stat into 4 and creating additional mechanics. Also, if the intentions are to better represent characteristics, why not break down strength or toughness? Give us a push and pull strength stat, give us different toughness stats like endurance or pain tolerance as well. It seems to me like if you're going to explore this design base, you should explore it for all the other stats and not just leadership. Now, from what I can understand, the system works well in things like Necromunda, a game with far fewer models on the table, but I can't see this transitioning well into a game where players can easily have as many squads as there are models on the table in a game of Necromunda, not to mention the hundreds of interactions that take place over a turn. I fear that adding this one extra system won't help at all and just lead to another layer of stuff getting in the way. My concern is that this adds another layer of mental load onto players, who already have to deal with a huge number of moving parts, and that this change feels to me a lot like busy work. Having another set of stats, all with very slightly different values, creates bloat and feels to me like padding. Also, if a unit has no way of utilising the stat or will never be called upon to use the stat, then it is in practice useless. We'll have to see the amount of things that units can do with this addition and how many times they're going to be called upon to make those checks. However, this system may provide a new avenue to deal with your enemy's troops. Yes, I can't kill those troops, but if they have a low cool score, I can maybe pin them down or drive them off the board. Now, this could work, and I'm open to it, but I would need to see it employed before I'll be convinced. Also, just because this mechanic was part of the game in the first edition, Rogue Trader, doesn't mean that it has any value to the game in its current state. I'd be very interested to talk to the original designers and learn why this system was dropped. And I wonder if any of those points as to why it was dropped would be relevant today. I would speculate that it was dropped for being clunky, clumsy, and not providing any substantial gameplay depth. And I fear that bringing the system to Heresy will make for a less intuitive system. However, I do hope that this is not the case, and that I will soon be seeing the benefits and the gameplay depths of this new system. However, I feel that the most likely scenario is that this is a vestigial system that doesn't provide any real improvements or is a straight downside to 3rd edition. While I reserve final judgment until we see the implementation of these rules, but right now, I don't see this as anything more than a needless rules bloat. So, not off to a good start. Next up, tactical statuses. A self-described smart system, which is just more of GW sucking their own cock. This new system introduces 4 new statuses. Pinned, which stops you from moving. Suppressed, which hampers your reactions and tests off the cool advanced characteristic. Suppressed, which makes your shots fly wide and tests off the cool advanced characteristic. Stunned, which renders a unit insensible and is stopped in their tracks, which makes it sound a lot like pinned and also tests off the cool advanced characteristic. And routed, which is when a unit is running away and tests off the leadership advanced characteristic. We learn that weapons will now inflict statuses, like rotor cannons inflicting the pin status and flamers using the Panic X special rule to rout enemies, and all weapons also inflicting the dead status upon the enemy. This article is the shortest of the 3, the shallowest, and tells us very little. At the end of the article, it mentions these plastic tokens, and it was these that annoy me the most. What occurs to me is that in playtesting, these statuses were either so common or so infrequent that they created memory issues, either overloading players or not being relevant enough, and so were frequently forgotten. So in both scenarios, they required tokens to remember these statuses and how they affected the game. Either way, these statuses seem to me like they are creating a memory issue, basically adding another layer of stuff for players to remember just to play the game. On a side note, perhaps it's just me, I don't like having markers and reminder buttons scattered across the battlefield. These things remind me that I am in fact playing a game and make it harder to immerse myself in the fiction and the narrative of the game itself. And while there's nothing to say that you have to play with them, if there are so many statuses inflicted to so many different squads and they all need remembering across 2 large armies, then I'd say that these tokens are almost necessary to play the game. I'll reserve judgment until I see the final product, but right now I'm not a fan of these tokens, as for me personally, I'd like to have a clean and clear board with just the models and the terrain, more closer to a diorama than a full-on gaming setup. Thinking about this, it's very much crystallized in my mind the reason why I left 40k. Now, bear with me here, but for me, the standardized L-shaped ICT-compliant terrain really annoys me. For me, it boils the game down to its most game-like aspect, which is fine if you like that, but for me, that really grinds the soul and narrative out of the experience, reducing it to its most base form that it can be. As with the advanced characteristics, I'll reserve my final judgment until I've seen and played with the full rules, but right now, this doesn't bode well for me. And lastly, weapon stats. This is the big one so far. The changes to weapons will be the most noticeable, as it's how you interact with your opponents for the majority of the game. While the article goes to great lengths to assure us that a tactical marine still acts the same, we already see a big change. Gone is the old formatting of weapons in favour of this new layout. Weapon stats have been replaced with range, or R, in inches, firepower, or FP, which is how many shots the gun gets, range strength, or RS, for how strong it is, as opposed to just strength, armor penetration, or AP, which thankfully still works like it did in 2.0, which I'm very relieved at, and damage, or D, which we'll get onto that later. Weapons keep special rules, but also gain a trait section, such as bolters, which have the bolt trait. I imagine this is a rework of how in the armory section of the rulebook you'd see a little bit of text saying the following weapons are considered bolt weapons or flame weapons, for example. We see an example of a stat line for a bolter, which has now replaced the rapid fire with a flat 2 shots. Okay, fair enough. However, this does mean that Space Marines will be getting double the number of shots at their full range. But then we see the heavy weapons and, oh Christ. Instead of forcing you to snapfire your weapons, so only hitting on 6s when you move, now it gives you a +1 modifier to a specific stat if you stand still. Whereas you'd have your heavy bolters hitting on a 6+ if you moved. So now, instead of punishing you for moving, it's rewarding you for staying still. It's a subtle change, but I think this speaks to the new design ethos. Instead of having a baseline and going down when you do certain things, you have a baseline and you go up when you do certain things. The old rule of being forced to snap shoot heavy weapons means that you as a player had to think about your deployment if you have to move your unit. Now, if you mess up and deploy a unit out of position, you can just walk there and it's fine. You're only giving up a bonus and not sacrificing a turn of shooting, doing only snapshots. I would guess this is about having that bad feeling of having an ineffective round of shooting. But in the same way, I'd also argue that is it not a good feeling when you have a well-placed squad in an effective position because you as a commander made a good decision? In this way, not being able to move and shoot your heavy weapons rewards you for good thought and being a good player, while punishing bad plays and out-of-place deployments. This change with the heavy rule is really illustrated to me by the change of las cannons, which if you stay still get an extra point of damage and as it states can one-tap a 2-wound Terminator. This implies to me that las cannons are still going to be really good in the next edition, especially if there's little downside to moving and shooting. Also, this points out that Saturnine Terminators are going to have 3 wounds apiece, which are going to be a real pain to chew through if instant death is gone. You'll have to rely on really high damage weapons to be able to get through these guys. Now, we see melter guns and, oh god, what have you done? 3 damage apiece! Oh, and the bloody Melter X rule. It now deals that much damage instead. So melter guns that are firing within half range, such as 6 inches, deal 6 damage. It won't matter if this melter rule is only against dreadnoughts and vehicles, because with 3 damage, just say goodbye to Terminators and big infantry, as melter guns will just delete them. We also learn that this 6 damage will instant kill Deredeo dreadnoughts, which have 6 wounds or less, and a Predator tank which has 6 wounds, hull points at least. Even if this new melter rule doesn't apply to infantry, the fact that melter guns deal a flat 3 damage means that even Saturnine Terminators will get easily killed by this. With what we've seen here, I'd be ready to expect a lot more las cannons and a lot more melter guns, multi or not. And why? Because players are going to gravitate to the weapon that deals the most damage. If it's 2 damage per shot from las cannons at 48 inches, or 6 damage from multi-melters at 12, because those weapons will kill things faster and deader than other weapons. Doesn't matter if you're a tank, a dreadnought, or infantry. Damage is damage, and you have a finite number of wounds. And finally, the most egregious thing to me is the reworks to Eternal Warrior. This is just disgustingly resilient by another name, or any of the myriad of -1 damage effects that 40k is so plagued by. The fact that this can come in multiple units and isn't reserved for special characters implies to me that this rule could come up much more frequently than we would like. Just the fact alone that GW acknowledges that some of these weapons are far more lethal than last edition shows how much they know that this could be an issue, and they're already putting in checks and balances to curtail the lethality of the things they've created. I'd be very surprised if the new Saturnine Dreadnought doesn't have -1 damage on it. Next, we're going on to Disintegrators, and what a letdown. Gone is the instant death rifle, and instead we get this flaccid pseudo-plasma gun. Yeah, it does 2 damage, but at AP3 it won't deal with Terminators and other 2+ armor targets. It may have a niche against veterans, but at that point, just use any AP3 weapon, or hell, a melter gun or a las cannon. Now, we also learn that the Overload special rule is likely the new Gets Hot special rule, where any roll to hit of 1 means you target your own squad. But not the user? This reads to me as the user overloads his gun and instead of having the decency to put it under his own chin and kill himself, he shoots his own squad in the back. What a dick. I hope to God that the Disintegrator trait lets me just delete models, because as it stands, I don't see a role for these weapons that isn't done better by las cannons or melter weapons. Next, we move on to melee weapons, and this could actually be for the better. The first thing, and the thing that I like the most, is the initiative modifiers, which affects how quickly the weapon strikes. I like this, as I think this takes advantage of an existing system and builds upon it, with weapons like Power Fists and Power Actors being slower than Power Swords. Good. This forces you as a commander to make a decision. Do I want to risk potentially taking wounds in the first few rounds of combat so I can get in with my big heavy hitters, or do I just want to try and knife my opponent before he can get his attacks off? This is good. This also rewards faster fighters. So for example, you would have a really fast duelist striking with a power axe before a slower fighter with a power sword. This is a good feature of the new system. Attacks modifiers, another good system. Instead of locking your attack characteristics just to the character, you're letting the weapons also dictate this. Maybe having faster striking whips being able to get in extra attacks, or slower weapons having reduced numbers of attacks. Good. Strength modifiers, totally fine, bigger, badder weapons should hit harder. Cool. Also, melee weapons have the same AP, damage, and traits mechanics as ranged weapons. All fine there. Overall, I think the changes to weapons could be good, but I find the changes to the shooting weapons to be generally needless. As always, we have to wait to see the full picture, but I'm very worried about how they will be implemented, as the shooting weapons and how they kill their opponents is the main way the game plays, by far the biggest factor in Horus Heresy. Finally, I can't see any upsides to the introduction of the damage stat, and I think it's a bad one, as I believe that it's going to likely go the same way of 40k style power creep, with an endless arms race of escalating wound count, damage, and -1 damage effects. I really hope that I'm wrong here, however, I don't see anything in the material we've been given that shows me anything to the contrary, especially considering GW's track record when it comes to power scaling and balancing. I don't like being negative, but this is the way I see it, and I'm not a fan of it. In conclusion, I am not best pleased with the direction this edition is appearing to be going. From the changes to the weapons to the introduction of what I feel to be archaic mechanics that were left by the roadside decades ago, a lot of these changes, especially the changes to weapons, feel to me like a change for the sake of change and not necessarily for the better. One of the things that makes me dislike this edition and the rollout of it is that I find myself reading these articles and dreading what will be changed and feeling relieved to find that there are a few things that have not been tampered with. I don't want that feeling. I want to like this edition, I want to like Heresy, but there's nothing here that makes me. I also want to make it clear that 3rd edition could be very good, and I really hope it is. But right now, there is nothing coming out about this game that gives me any hope. I've spoken to lots of players at my local LGS who are hopeful and looking forward to the next edition, and that's great. However, as an example, from what I hear, 40k is also a great game at the moment, and lots of people I talk to really enjoy it. However, it wouldn't matter if it was the best game on Earth. It doesn't interest me. It's not the game for me. At the end of the day, I'm going to play what I want to play, and if 3rd edition of Heresy ends up being a diet version of 40k 8th edition, which, to me at least, it looks like, I'm not going to play it. So on that jury note, I'll leave you guys there. Again, I want to stress that I'm not saying anyone is wrong for liking the direction 30k is going. It's a preference, and I want to be as fair and balanced to 3rd edition as I possibly can, and I'll give it a fair shot. Probably more than fair, as I really want to like 30k, as I have long since left 40k behind, and frankly, Horus Heresy is the only reason I'm still invested in this setting. On a personal note, I'm going to keep making 2.0 content up to the release of 3.0, and we'll have to see about 3rd edition once it rolls around. I'm not going to tie myself to a system before I see what I like about it, and if I lose subscribers or viewers in doing so, then so be it. I'm here to make what I want to make, and accept the consequences, good or bad. So stay tuned for more, as we'll be covering these new releases as and when they come out. My name is Mechanid. Thanks for watching. Save yourself some money and save yourself some buyer's remorse. Remorse?